Bonjour tout le monde. That was Vanille Fraise. Nous avons faire. Qu'est-ce que vous faites dans la vie? What do you do in life? So we're talking about professions and how you can ask other people and talk about what other people do and what you do. So on y va. So one of the first things I'm going to talk about, because we're talking about professions, there is a drastic difference between French life and American life. And one of that has to do with the work-life balance. And the French have always been progressive thinking in protecting their culture. They not only take true delight in their food and taking the time to eat their food and their socialization, but they have taken the efforts to protect that. They know and understand how important these traditions are. So in 2016, the French government adopted a labor law that, among other provisions, included a right to disconnect. And I love this because this is really before the pandemic when we really all went online. So this right, which took effect on January 1st, 2017, refers to employers' obligation to stop encroaching on their employees' personal and family lives with calls and emails. Can you imagine? Under the right to disconnect, employees do not have to take calls or read emails related to work during their off time. So I love that they were progressive and passed a law keeping up with technology, whereas in the U.S., for us, having access to work online means that we can work more and we can also do it when we go home or on the weekends, really blurring those lines about that work-life balance. I know I have teacher's guilt, mother's guilt, work guilt, and I really try to take a more European look at it and being like, okay, I've put in my 8 hours today. That's okay. I can cut off after that and go build a quality life for myself, which is really hard as an American because we're so trained to be such hard workers and highly motivated. So I really appreciate that. So that is called the right to disconnect. Spain also passed that same law in 2017. So just to talk a little bit about the work week, because we're talking about professions, French labor law dictates that the standard work week in France is 35 hours per week. However, this can vary based on the industry and is subject to any collective bargaining agreements. But for the most part, 35 hours is the standard. This is the part I love the most. French labor law stipulates that full-time employees working a 35-hour week are entitled to a minimum 5 weeks paid leave annually. So to be able to get 5 weeks in the United States, besides any other profession, besides teaching, you usually have to work for quite a few years to earn that, and that is not the standard. And so in the next lesson, I'll talk about vacation days, but 5 weeks is the absolute minimum. A lot of companies give a 4-week break in July. It's common that a lot of businesses go on break during that period of time because everybody goes on holiday. So really cool that they respect quality of life, and you can really see that in their culture and how that affects them as a society in total. So on y va. So our lesson today is Qu'est-ce que tu fais? Qu'est-ce que vous faites dans la vie? So what do you do? The first one on the top is the informal, and the one on the bottom, Qu'est-ce que vous faites dans la vie, is the formal, asking somebody what they do. So here, je suis serveur. So je suis means I am. If you want to sound more Parisian or French, you say je suis. It kind of like goes together in saying je suis serveur. So this is pretty simple lesson. Remember faire, this is the verb faire right here. That means to do or to make. So what do you do for a living? Je suis means I am. So sometimes people just say what field they're in as well. So if I said qu'est-ce que tu fais? Je travaille dans le marketing. So travail means to work. Je travaille. Je travaille dans l'éducation. So you could also say it in this format as well. So on y va. Names of professions are considered to be nouns, but they can also be thought of as adjectives that describe people. So for this reason, there are two ways in French to say what someone's job profession is. So, je suis journaliste. I'm a journalist. C'est un journaliste. So the first one would be the adjective. The second one is a noun. So, on y va à pratiquer. So we're going to practice. Qu'est-ce que tu fais? Qu'est-ce que c'est la profession? What is the profession? Qu'est-ce que tu fais? Je suis architecte. Qu'est-ce que tu fais? Il y a deux réponses. There's two responses. Je suis infirmière. Je suis femme de médecin. So the first one is I'm a nurse. The next one is I'm a doctor, a woman doctor. Qu'est-ce que tu fais? Je suis ouvrier. Je suis ouvrière. A worker, a laborer. So speaking of laborers or workers, France is known to strike, and they are, out of all European countries, they strike more than any other country. And so a lot of times there's always running jokes about the French going on strike and standing up for their rights. And so that's really cool that they have that je ne sais quoi about them, about standing up for what they think is a quality of life. And so they're pretty famous for striking quite often. They had a really big one last May that turned into some different riots as well. It was the garbage collectors that were going on strike, and it caused a lot of issue because no trash was being picked up over the city, all around the city. So it got quite smelly as well. So, but I think the French are quite used to going on strike and expecting that to happen. So, qu'est-ce que tu fais? So I'm looking for stay-at-home mother. Je suis mère au foyer. If I was a stay-at-home father, je suis père à foyer. Je suis père à foyer. So now I'm just asking in the formal, qu'est-ce que vous faites? Je suis prof. Je suis professeur. Je suis prof de français. Je suis prof de anglais. Je suis prof d'espagnol. Je suis prof d'allemand. Je suis prof de la maths. N'est pas vrai, je suis désastre avec la math. Qu'est-ce que vous faites? So here I'm looking for businesswoman. Je suis femme d'affaires. If you're a businessman, je suis homme d'affaires. Qu'est-ce que vous faites? Je suis chef. So typically, in general, and I think this is the same in the United States as well, but historically, the profession of being a chef has been male dominated, and it really is still true today. But there is one American, if you guys remember from last semester, that was able to break through this, and that was Julia Child. She was in Paris, and she signed up to the Cordon Bleu. She was one of the very first women to do that. She then graduated at the top of her class. She was the only woman in her class. and was able to be successful in a male-dominated world. So this past May, I went on a tour, and it was called In the Footsteps of Julia Child. And we had this fantastic tour guide who also happened to be a chef. Her name was Lulu, and you're going to see her later on when we do the chapter on food. And she talked about how to this day, it is still challenging as a female to break in to this male-dominated profession of being a chef in a restaurant. It still happens. I mean, it does happen, but it's still a lot of glass ceilings and a lot of barriers and other things that need to be tolerated in order to be successful. So that was really interesting for me to hear that. And this girl, she was 35, maybe or even a little bit younger. And she was talking about even for her age as well, that she was old. You know, not only was she starting too late in her 30s, you know, she was also a woman. So that's almost two strikes against you. Usually, if you're going to go into the profession of being a chef, you start younger. And so for her, Julia Child was also a huge influence because Julia's career really, really began in her 50s, when in a time period where women would never have been considered in that age, she broke those standards and paved the way for many women to come after her, which I think is just a really awesome example. So there are a lot of male chefs still in France and also in the United States as well. And so that's just a little bit of history. So one of the things I'm going to end our lesson on today is a cultural note, and something that I just had heard recently and never had really thought about or reflected on until I heard this conversation about it. So it was a Spanish person talking about their conversations with their coworkers or people that they just meet from anywhere around in the world, and how generally Spanish and French people ask something different compared to when we first meet someone. When we're Americans, we generally will ask this question, what do you do? Which really, you know, is an interesting question to ask when you're trying to get to know somebody, because we're immediately implying about status, because job has everything to do with status in the United States and what you do. And so, this conversation that the Spanish person was having was saying how oftentimes in French or Spanish culture, you don't ask somebody what they do. If that happens to come up, it comes up. But usually the first thing you ask about is people's family and how their family is. And I thought this was really interesting because, of course, I'm a very curious person, and so it usually is one of the very first things that I ask is, what do you do? And now I'm trying to rethink about how I can have these conversations, and maybe not start out with that question and start out with family and other things like that. So just a cultural note to end today's quick lesson. So really easy activity about what you do and profession, some listening. You'll be great. So, on y va. Au revoir.